need to know a little bit about you, though, before I start writing, so I make sure I hit on the things that you want me to. Are you all here because you like to write? You're writers? Yes? Okay. And also, so I know how to time this, some of you have brought things to read. Is that correct? Well, we'll play it by ear then and see. Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about my background, other than what Betty told you. I've been writing certainly all my adult life, and off and on going back to probably the tail end of grade school. But as far as working, the writing kind of got put on hold for a little bit of teaching, and then I did a lot of years at the Missoulian as a newspaper reporter first, did some editing, did columns, did features, did some adult magazine writing, that kind of thing. It was very recent that I turned to fiction, and that's what I do full time now. I absolutely love it, and I've got to tell you, I have finally, after years and years, found what I think is the world's most perfect job. I do it on my own terms. I've got the best excuse in the world to poke my nose into whatever interests me. I get to meet people. I get to travel to pin down locations. I get to stay home and just explore on paper what I like to explore. It's a great job. I kind of bumped along until I figured out how to get into it. And I guess the two things I'd like to do with you tonight, other than answer questions that you might have, is just kind of show you how I go about what I do, and also try to show you some of the things in the writing and publishing process. Almost every step of the way came as a complete surprise to me. I'd open my mailbox and see, this is the next thing along the way. Maybe there's an easier way than bumping along, and if there's not, at least I can maybe demystify it for you a bit. So I brought some things along to show you from the publishing process, but first I thought I'd just talk about the book a little bit and kind of how I write and show you the results in some of the places in the book. I have to tell you, I'm learning as I go. When I first started trying fiction, and it's been several years ago now, I worked my way completely through a couple of practice novels, and honestly can say thank goodness nobody bought them. They're better off in my file drawers unpublished. But I learned in each one of those how to handle something. Mandy's my first novel out the window. I was fortunate in that a lot of things came together right for me on this one, and it made it publishable. But at the end of it, I had to go back and figure out what I had done and try to apply it to a second novel. I didn't get the whole thing quite figured out. The second novel that Betty talked about, Pictures, will be out next summer, but it was a much harder book for me to finish because I hadn't figured out what I did right this first time. The third one that I'm working on now, I think, is going more smoothly, but it's because I've learned in the difficulties I had with that second one. So what I can tell you tonight is what I know now. I hope if I did this talk a year from now, I'd be telling you more. Anyway, I do think that a book starts with character, and that plot grows out of character. Character for me starts on my computer, on very free writing. How many of you all keep journals? Any of you? It's something I wish I had kept and had a record of going back a lot of years, and I don't. But I've been keeping one in recent years, and it's not a diary kind of thing. It's more just turn my computer on in the morning and just let it talk and just kind of jabber away whatever I want to think about. What it does is that it lets me pin down what interests me. Sometimes, and I don't always go to myself for this. If I'm reading something, I may respond to that. If I read a poem, I may respond to a line in the poem. If I've seen a character on the street or in the bus that interests me, I may speculate about that person. So it's not necessarily a non-fiction log of my life. It's a place for me to try things out. And when once in a while a character does come to life, I start to hear somebody talking other than me. And when that happens, I let the character talk. I let that voice go. Sometimes I'll push it by asking questions and having the person answer. And that's kind of where Mandy came from. And Betty told you a little bit about the window story. It's about a 15-year-old girl named Mandy. And the book opens just after an automobile accident in which Mandy has lost her sight. She's also lost her mother. But as in any book, the story starts years before chapter 1. It starts with all the things that brought Mandy to being the person that she is at the beginning. And for Mandy, all those years had been really a very lonely time. She and her mother was the only family she knew, lived a real knockabout life. They moved from place to place. They never stayed in any one town more than a few months. So Mandy was very lonely. But, just think to yourselves, what happens when you have to move around like that? Can you imagine what it would do to a kid? And there's some different ways that it would go. But what it did to Mandy was make her fiercely independent, very proud of being able to take care of herself without needing friends or family or anything to make it go for her. And that's the way Mandy sees herself at the beginning of the book. She says, I can take care of myself. This is Mandy talking. That's my gift. Other girls get blonde hair and nice families and brains that tell them the right things to say. I've got knowing how to take care of myself and how to face what I have to face. But it's all very well and good for Mandy to be very proud of herself and her ability to get along independently, something she's done for years. But the whole game has changed now. Mandy's blind. She no longer has her mother. She's gone to live with a great aunt and great uncle she's never met. And she's in a strange place. She's moved to Texas. So she's having to face all the questions that anybody going to a new place have to face, except they're notched up because she's facing them on completely different terms with herself. But remember, she's really proud too. So the first morning in the room, her great uncle asks her, so Mandy, what do you want to do? The question is school. Where? If I want to go away to this special one where there would be other blind kids, or if I want to try the high school in town. And there have been meetings, but the decision's been that the decision is left up to Mandy. What do you want to do, Mandy? Uncle Gabriel asks. Pros and cons either way. He doesn't have to spell out the cons. And besides, I doubt if he thinks of the same ones that I do. A school of 1,500 normal kids. Will they make room for me? Whisper and watch me? Will they laugh at me? Don't be stupid, Mandy, I think. Of course they will. But since when haven't you been able to handle being the outsider? Mandy the new girl, I think. Mandy the new blind girl. So what's the difference? I don't fool myself. The difference is huge. And it lies, cold and sick feeling, in the pit of my stomach. I swallow back welling saliva. The regular high school, I guess. So she tries it. She has a rough first day. She meets some friends. One of the first people she meets is a guy named Ted, who turns out to be really nice. But the first thing he asks her is, so Mandy, you anything besides blind? And that's the question Mandy really has to answer. And also, it's one of the questions that I had to deal with in letting her tell her story. Now, in putting Mandy together, when I started writing the first draft, I had a lot of Mandy in place on my computer in what I'm telling you I call these journal entries, because that's how I think of it. But really it's just free writing that I do every morning, first thing in the morning, and at the end of the week on a Friday, print the whole thing out and bind them up. And that's my basic resource. It's surprising how the pages pile up and how you have a lot of stuff written that you find a place for eventually. Some of Mandy came from bits and pieces of my own experience. And some of this, and this is why I say I wish I'd started keeping a journal when I was a lot younger. I spend a lot of time trying to dredge up memories of what happened to me when I was 15, 16, 17 years old. And, you know, sometimes I'll see a photo I haven't seen for a while, and that will bring things back to me. Or I'll hear a snatch of music. Or you go someplace and you know, smells are really a key to memory sometimes. And, you know, you smell something and you track it down to another place. But I write fiction. Nothing from my experience goes directly into a story. What happens is you take bits and pieces, you know, that you have, and you kind of tumble them around, and things you hear about other people doing. You put them together, you have fun with them, and you expand on them. And you come up with scenes like this one. This is very late in the book, and Mandy's really getting along a lot better. By now, Ted, that guy I was telling you about at the front, is, he and Mandy are going out together, and they're going out with another girl. Mandy's best friend is a girl named Hannah, who goes out with a guy named Ryan. And one night down in Texas, and this is the part that, you know, was a bit and piece of my experience. I spent my summers down there when I was Mandy's age, and often I'd camp out on the front lawn. It was kind of a rural area, in a tent with a girlfriend, and we'd sit up late at night playing games, and you know, once in a while people had come by to visit. And this story kind of came out of that, and then some other experiences too. But she and Hannah have been up late. They've been out in a pup tent pitched on the lawn, and Ted and Ryan drive up, and the girls are in, the girls were sort of dressed for the night, but their Aunt Emma had come down and brought a couple of long flannel nightgowns to them because the night was getting chilly, and they'd put them on. And when the guys drive up, the girls get in the car still in those nightgowns and spend an hour or so driving around a small Texas town, ducking every time they come to anybody because they are wearing Aunt Emma's nightgowns. Except at the hamburger place where we get French fries, and Hannah knows the girl at the drive-in window. "Set up, Mandy," she says. "We'll pretend we're going to a costume party." And then after all that hiding, we're driving along, listening to the radio, when suddenly Hannah says, "Ted, stop." She reaches past me to turn the music up loud. And in another minute, all four of us are out in the middle of the road, dancing in the headlights of Ted's car, lights that shine through my eyelids when I turn toward them. Cars go past, and everyone honks, and the guys are laughing as hard as we are. Then Ted says, "That's a police cruiser," and we scramble back inside his car. We're sitting in the car's four corners, trying to act like we haven't been doing anything unusual, when the patrolman comes to the window. He swings his flashlight around. I see the light as it crosses my eyes. "You kids okay?" His voice gets louder. I guess it's some indication from Ted. Ted has a hearing problem. "Everything all right in here?" "Yes, sir," says Ted. But the patrolman says, "Girls?" And he waits until both Hannah and I answer. "Then you better get on home and get dressed," he says. "Yes, sir," says Ted again. And then, once we're driving, we laugh and laugh like we're going to laugh forever. I say, "Ted, he meant us. Hannah and I should get dressed." "How do you know?" Ryan asks. And the four of us about die laughing, Ryan the hardest. And Hannah tells Ted to watch the road. So Hannah's come at this, or Mandy's come at this point a long way. Far enough along that she can laugh at herself and at her blindness and have friends that can too, along with dealing with it. But then I think the last selection I'll read to you to illustrate this first draft process, which, as I've tried to tell you, goes from imagining and incorporating experience and what you know, but then the third part of it is backing the whole thing up with some real research, so that even though you're making something up, what you make up is as true as you know how to make it. And in the case of Mandy, this took a tremendous amount of research for me because I had to pin down what blindness was all about and what a blind kid would have to learn. One of the first people I went to was a man named Fred Bischoff here in Missoula, who used to teach orientation and mobility to blind people. Orientation, how to know where you are in a place, and mobility, how to get around in it from one place to another. He was the first of many people that I talked with, teachers, counselors, kids over at, we have a school for the blind and the deaf in Great Falls, and people that read my manuscript. But a lot of the passages in the book that deal specifically with blindness come from that sort of research. So this last one I'll read to you, it illustrates that. Mandy, in this book, she's just met her orientation and mobility instructor. His name is Mr. Burkhart. And O&M tells her that's the name of the game. And Mandy very quickly starts thinking of him as the great Om. He's nice and kind of jokey loud. And pretty soon I'm thinking of him as the great Om. I learn more in an hour from him than I can pick up on my own in days. Big stuff. Like how to identify street intersections, deal with traffic, ask people for directions when they don't have a clue where north and south are. He has me practice things like trailing, following a wall, listening for the water fountain outside the library. Snap your fingers, Mandy, Mr. Burkhart says. And I hear how the sound changes as I pass by an open doorway. He asks questions like, Mandy, how do you search for something you've dropped? The answer is very carefully. Curved fingers ready to pull back at the first touch of danger, or before I break what I'm looking for. Mandy, he says, what are you going to do when you're all alone in a strange place and you don't have your cane? He won't settle for sit down and cry, and instead makes me learn how to feel my way forward. One arm protecting my face, a hand in front of my lower body. The great Om, my guide to moving through space. So that's Mandy. Now, the process of getting her into a finished book, I'm going to try and take you through it kind of chronologically, but I have to tell you a lot of these steps overlapped. You know, there's not a real clear-cut sort of a way to do this thing. Fairly late in the process, the book is set in Texas, and I did that because my family is from Texas. I spent a lot of time down there when I was Mandy's age. More importantly, the older characters in the book are important, and that's where I knew older people from. So that was the reason for the setting. But when I had an opportunity, I did a trip down to Texas so that I could pin down both the things that I remembered, to be sure that I remembered them correctly, and also that I could just check the details of setting, that I could go back to some old newspapers that were relevant to the story of Mandy's grandmother, which is also part of this book. And I brought along just some odds and ends of this. Can you all see that? That's a picture of me, but it's taken in the Texas State Library and Archives. And I bring it along because this is one of the kinds of things that I love to do and that a lot of writers enjoy doing. An archival library is an absolutely wonderful place. In addition to all sorts of printed materials you'd find other places, it will have a lot of material that's never been published, one-of-a-kind things. Letters, postcards, writings, old phone books, old street maps, insurance maps. It's a fantastic place to go. And if you notice, I'm wearing a key on my wrist. That's because you don't take anything into an archival library that might let you take something back out also. You check your pocketbook, you check your coat, everything in a locker, and you get a key to it, and then you go into work. The one thing you're allowed to take in is your computer. That's my laptop. And I'm wearing gloves, and that's because what I'm looking at right there is a very old postcard. It may be the only postcard in existence, that particular one, and those gloves protect it from any oil that's on my hands. So that's one kind of research that I did when I was working on Mandy. Now another kind involved finding out more about blindness. One of the first things I had to learn about, because it's one of the first things that Mandy has to come to grips with in school, is what Braille's all about. Do any of you read Braille or know anything about it? It's not really a mystery. Braille is just a code. If you think of a Morse code or ship's flags, anything like that that gives you a way to substitute some symbol for letters of the alphabet. That's what Braille does. A Braille cell looks like the number 6 domino. Okay? And it's got 6 possible positions for dots on it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you can make any letter of the alphabet by some unique pattern of one or more of those dots. So the top left dot all by itself is the letter A. That dot, the number 1 dot, plus the 4 and 5 dots make up, that's the symbol for the letter D. So there's a dot combination for every letter of the alphabet. There are no numbers as such in Braille. But what there is a number symbol, and it's the 3, 4, 5, and 6 dots, so that it looks like a backwards L. And if you put that symbol in front of any of the first letters of the alphabet, it turns the letter into a number. So if you put the number symbol in front of the Braille symbol for an A, that makes the number 1. The number symbol in front of a B would become a 2. In front of a C would become a 3. There's a D. That's the number 4. So if you ever get on an elevator, have you ever looked at the Braille on an elevator and wondered why it took so many dots to say you're on the first floor? That's the answer. The first series of them is the number symbol. And I'll just pass around. I enjoy looking at this. 2 things. One is just the Braille alphabet. And if you want to try it out, do I have capitals? Yes. This says the window, okay? And just so you don't get thrown off, the first dot at the beginning of each of the words is the symbol for a capital letter coming. So it's a capital letter, it's the capital symbol and then the letter T. And you can read that across. This is a copy of a weekly edition of the New York Times done in Braille. It's embossed on both sides. You cannot do a direct translation from this card to this because when you think of all the combinations of patterns possible out of 6 dots, there are a lot more patterns possible than there are letters to the alphabet. And the extra ones are used for things, are used to make sort of a shorthand. So you can say, so you could write ED with one symbol instead of having to use 2 letters. Or contractions, really common words will have just their own pattern, the, of, and. So that's called grade 2 Braille. This is written in grade 2 Braille. I'll pass those 2 things around. And then still on the lines of learning about things that Mandy would have to learn about, this is a picture of an office of a Missoula man who is blind. He has a little bit of sight, but that's generally the case. Most people that are blind can see somewhat. And I'd like to show you some of the other equipment that he uses. This is just a computer monitor, like you would have a regular one. It's hooked up to a standard laptop computer. But over here behind him where you can't see it is a Braille keypad so that he can do input either through the laptop's keyboard, standard keyboard, or into Braille. And what makes the whole thing work is this piece of equipment right in here, this little black box. And that's a speech synthesizer, so that anything that he either types into the computer or any computer file that he brings up on his screen is read out loud to him through the synthesizer, and he can either choose to have it read out loud letter by letter, spelled out, or he can have it read in words and sentences. I asked him why he has the monitor turned on, because he is blind, but many blind people do have some sight. And his answer was that while he can't really read the words on the monitor, he can see them well enough that the shapes of what's up there give him a clue to the commands or to the messages that are appearing. The other piece of equipment that's here, and this is really cool, this is one that my mom uses. My mother has macular degeneration, which is a kind of, which causes blindness in older people often. It's called a CCTV, or a closed circuit television camera. It's mounted up in here. There's a little camera up in here. Anything that's put on this shelf is blown up really big on the screen to whatever magnification that you need it blown up to. So here's a picture, title page from my book down here. The type is really quite small, but it's blown up here to explode across the screen. If you needed it to, you could blow it up so that 2 or 3 letters can fill that whole screen. So my mother cannot, for instance, cannot read my book in this text, but she was able to read it by blowing it up very large onto her CCTV. I also work in a writing group, which is something most writers do. I work with, actually there's 7 or 8 of us in the group. You may know the writing from some of them, Dorothy Patton, or Hanneke Ippisch, or Peggy Christian, Bruce Whiting, Sneed Collard. And we get together every couple of weeks and bring whatever we've written and read it to each other, critique it, talk out the problems we're having, listen to people tell us what's working and what's not. I don't know how a writer would work without people like that to help. Most of the time the suggestions are practical and really right on point. Sometimes they cause a lot of trouble. I'm going to show you this picture, and this is not from the window. This is from Pictures 1918, the one coming out next year. But I went to writing group one day and said I was just so muddled. I had this novel going. I'd revised, added in, taken out so many times I had lost track of what I'd done. I just couldn't quite picture it. And what I did is their suggestion. This is my living room. I went home and I printed out my entire novel, single-spaced, cut it up by chapters, hung it on half sheets. Those are Missoulian end rolls cut in half, and taped the thing to my windows and went through with colored markers and assigned a different marker to each of my main characters, my plot and my subplot. And when I had it done, I was able to see where it went off balance, where I had several chapters going where I had completely dropped a thread that I needed to keep alive. So I just bring that to show you as part of the writing process. Eventually, you do get to a completed manuscript. And this is what the manuscript looked like that I sent in. This is straight off my computer. Have any of you submitted to a magazines or anything like that? Any of your work? No? Okay, there are a number of them out there that will take work from, from teens. And if you do, your manuscript, when you send it in, should look very much the way this one looks. It's just got a name and address up in this corner. For a novel, it's got an approximate word count. If you were sending this to a magazine, if it were a magazine article or story, it would be an exact word count to within like 10 words. Title, the name, your name as you would want it on the article or on the story. When I first sent it in, I had a poem starting my piece, so that was there. Then chapter 1, and it gets going. You just start going. It's double-spaced, plain typewriter font. This is not the place to experiment with exotic type fonts or things that look like script. You want the one that your computer defaults to. Page 2 is the same thing. Everything's double-spaced. Up in this top corner, you repeat your last name, and you also repeat your title, or at least the key words of the title, so that if your manuscript gets spread out on some desk, they can bring it back together. And the page number. And that's what you do. You start a new page at the beginning of chapters, but other than that, you just go straight through. The only difference on this one is that I've stapled it, and you don't staple a submission. You don't paperclip it either. You just put your pages and send it flat. So that's what a manuscript looks like going in. If you're fortunate and it sells, and I was very fortunate with the window, Harcourt Brace took it, which is great. They're a very good publisher to be with. There's a long lag if it's a book. If it's a magazine, there's a long lag too, but not much goes on other than sooner or later you get a check. If it's a book, there's a long lag, and part of it is just moving through the contract process. Then part of it's waiting until the book actually starts going into the editorial and production process. And there, what happens differs a little bit from editor to editor and house to house. What happened with the window was that I got back an editorial letter, and this is something that in one form or another you would get back. And this is where my editor had gone through my manuscript and really worked on it in terms of what she thought needed doing to put it into final shape. This is not a check for spelling or grammar, but this is a check for, this is looking at content, and this is looking at sentence structure. So this is one page out of it. My editor is very neat. When my manuscript came back to me, she just had her little points numbered in the margin, and then that keyed it to the points in her letter. These are questions 5 through 20 out of, I think, a total of 90-some points, which was overwhelming when I saw them, but they were not bad, and that's not at all non-typical. And some of them were not things for change. Some of them were things where she wanted to point out what she thought was particularly effective, so I would know what was really working. Other things were questions that came up as she read, fairly large ones. She says on her first reading she was surprised that Mandy had never been in the house before and thinks that that's going to be something that surprises readers. So I really ought to answer that question in the first few pages so it doesn't become a red herring. Other points were very minor, where Mandy had done something wrong and I'd let her in dialogue use the term mess up, and my editor said that seems like just too strong a word for something as minor as Mandy's done. So some of it was just fine-tuning occasional words. The revision process goes pretty quickly. You have a couple, 3 weeks, and then this initial revision is done. You get back, it's a done manuscript. I was fortunate in that while that was going on, I happened to be in San Diego where Harcourt Brace has its trade offices. So I was able to spend some time there. This is my editor, and what we did was actually just spend an afternoon with the manuscript between us, that list of questions, and we went through and made a number of changes right on the manuscript and other things I came home to think about or to work on writing. Then her name is Diane, and after Diane and I had the manuscript where we wanted it in terms of the content, the wording, what was said, it went to a copy editor at Harcourt, and the copy editor would be in charge of going through and checking it for spelling, for punctuation, for style, for word choice, all that kind of thing. And at this point, the manuscript was Xeroxed once early, but then thereafter all the changes are actually made on the same manuscript. And this thing had gone back and forth FedEx a number of times before it got to this point. And this is the manuscript that I showed you before. But there are a number of changes, and you can kind of tell from the colors who's changing what. The blue ink are my own changes. One of the first things that went in response to Diane's comments was my poetry. One of these days I'll write a poem somebody likes, but it hasn't happened yet. But she let me delete it myself. Let's see. You can just kind of see her numbers on the edge there, the ones that keyed to her letter. As the copy editor got in, the copy editor really does not make changes on the, nobody makes changes on the manuscript that the writer does not agree with or authorize. The copy editor's changes were all suggested at this round on Post-it notes, and some of them would be quite obvious where they wanted commas changed, that sort of thing. Others would be questions where she picked up something that was not grammatically correct, and she wanted to point it out to me to make sure that I intended it to be that way. And generally I did, because the book is very much told in Mandy's voice, Mandy narrating it. And, you know, none of us talk in completely perfect sentences all the time. So one color of the Post-it notes were questions coming to me. If I said, if I picked up a mistake, as a result of that, I just went ahead and corrected it on the manuscript. If I wanted to talk about it or change things, then that went back in the form of different color Post-it notes from me on the edge of the manuscript. Once we got those questions all resolved, then somebody goes through it and makes notes on it so that a typesetter will know what to do. What kind of type to set it in, whether it's supposed to be bold, whether it's supposed to be all caps, something like that. And that's what all of these circled green notations are. Those are directions to the typesetter. So then the manuscript goes to a typesetter, and you don't see it again until you get back what are called rough pages. The typesetter has gone through and physically typed in to a computer from my manuscript with the changes all marked on it. And in these days, it used to be that you would get galleys. When you hear writers talk about galleys, it would be these long strips of printout. Now, because of computers, that step has sort of been jumped into this next step so that what comes out actually looks like what the book pages are going to look like. But they have not been proofread yet. This comes back, and again, as a writer, one of your responsibilities is to be reading and correcting and okaying each step of the way. It's something you want to do. It's also a requirement in your contract. You don't make a lot of changes after this point. One I did change, I didn't realize until I saw, that's not a front page from the paper. I didn't know until I saw these rough pages that somebody had gone through, and I thought this was so neat when I saw it. Under each one of the chapter numbers, they had sketched in the Braille symbol for that number. When I saw that, I realized that maybe somebody reading the book might want to know enough about Braille to be able to read those numbers just the way I explained them to you. So there was one little section where Mandy dealt with Braille, and I went back and expanded that section enough to include an explanation of how Braille numbers work. So those were rough pages. Those went back. The next thing you get is an uncorrected proof. And these are, it looks just like a book. It's almost completely done now, but the final proofreading hasn't been done. It's put together like and at this point the cover wasn't ready to go on my book either. But this came out several months before the book did, and it's done so that the book can get to reviewers and to libraries, and so that salesmen have something to take around so they can get some initial sales. The most important thing is to get it to reviewers so somebody will have a chance to read and write about your book at the time when it actually becomes available. So this is an uncorrected proof. Then you get a book in signatures. Books are always put together out of 8 pages folded, 8-page signatures. If you fold them, 8 times 2 becomes 16, and then you go front and back, so you end up with 32 pages, but it's out of 8 pieces of paper. When the paper's cut, they're printed on real wide sheets. So you get these signatures, and that comes to you. They're unbound, and as you can see by that flying one, they're just folded in each side of each other. And then finally, someplace along the line here too, you do get to see your cover. And then finally, you get a finished book. And that is pretty much the process as I've experienced it so far. And it's very much what I see my friends' books doing as they move through their publishing houses too. I'm open to questions. Anything you'd like to talk about or ask about?
Do you have any questions for Jeannette?
How many did you sell?
This is my first book. My second book, Pictures 1918, is sold, and it will be out tentatively a year from August, and I'm working on a third book. So that's all I've sold in the way of books. When I started writing fiction, my first stories that sold went to Children's Digest magazine. They were short stories. And then I had put together I had a little trouble pinning down my market. I put together a series of short stories that I thought would be a book, a collection of short stories, maybe for the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade crowd. And I took a class from Jane Yolen. Some of you may have read some of her books. She writes everything from picture books up through adult fantasy. And she gave it back to me kind of laughing, and she said, Jeanette, these are, in no way are these stories for children, but if you'd like, I'll buy one of them and put it in one of my anthologies I've got coming out for adults. And that was a story called Word Drift, about what happens to a town when words start to come to life and mutate. And it showed up in an anthology of original fantasy. This was an adult book from Tor Books called Xanadu 3 in 1995. So I guess those are the major sales. I really don't, and I haven't for a while, tried to do any more short fiction magazine work, partly because it's just, I find it very difficult to work on more than one book at a time, or more than one set of characters at a time. And just being practical at this point, the books are what I want to do. One thing that's really tough about writing for magazines, writing fiction, is that most of them buy all rights, which means when you sell your piece, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the magazine that bought it. I'm talking children's and young adult magazines now. And they'll run it one time, and your story sort of comes to life for one issue, and then it's dead. And I found that just really hard to deal with characters that I came to care about, even minimally. So that's probably, that's just something I'm not really interested in doing right now. That said, it's a really good way to break into trying to get fiction published. It's much easier to get a magazine story sold than it is to get a book sold. And for you all, that's really an avenue that's open. How many of you write fiction on your own that hasn't been assigned by a class? You've tried it anyway? Yeah, short stories. Have you tried sending them anyplace? I took a look, and just before I came down, I had an older copy, I think it was a 91 copy of a market guide called, I think it was Children's Writers and Illustrators Markets, some such thing. There are a number of these in the bookstore, and the library has a number of them upstairs. But I looked in this one because it had a section that detailed magazines that specifically were open to submissions by people still in school. And there were over 36 entries. And some of them were magazines that were really just all kids' works, but others were magazines like Children's Digest that I had in that does primarily stuff by adults, but they'll have maybe 10 or 15% of their things open to high school, sometimes even younger writers. This would be a neat thing to do if you're serious about your writing, to try to do those submissions. Oh, pictures has been just a real pleasure to write. It takes place, again, down in Texas in 1918 during the final months of World War I. And it's a story about, it opens, it's got a heart opening. It opens with a fire where my main character, a girl named Asia, loses somebody really dear to her. And it deals with Asia learning to trust what she thinks she has seen and learning to trust what she thinks she knows. And that's it. It was a neat book to write. Yeah, and actually, the way Harcourt brought this one out, they're saying young adults, ages 12 and up, and it's getting quite an adult readership also. And I suspect pictures will, if anything, pictures is perhaps even up some in age. Other questions? That was a fun one, by the way, to do. I talked about the fun parts of writing, and one of the things I love to do is take pictures. I've been an off and on photographer all my life, mostly amateur stuff, although when I worked at the Missoulian as a reporter, they did let me do most of my own photography there. And part of researching Asia just involved taking my camera and renting a car down in Texas and just sort of bumping around the back roads for a couple of weeks on one of the neatest trips I'd ever had. And what I was trying to do was get a feel in my own mind for what Asia's town would have been like. And the towns that I knew she lived in now have turned into cities. So going into them was not really a very suitable way to find out what it used to be like. But by going on the back roads, I was really able to find some towns that have not changed all that much. I think it was the same problem that Hollywood had when they filmed A River Runs Through It. You all saw that movie? And it takes place here in Missoula, or in the Blackfoot Valley. But we've changed so much here that we were no longer a suitable setting for a movie to be made. And I forget what town they came up with, but it was someplace across the mountains. So I drove around finding places that came closer to what Asia's town would have been like. Back then, reading old newspapers, that's the greatest way in the world to do some time traveling, is to start reading what the people of a particular time read when they got up every morning. The novels, the stories of the time, too. Of all the years of writing, I told you right now, I think I love my job. I absolutely love waking up in the morning and turning my computer on. Often I don't even roll out of bed before I get my first hour's work done. But the other job in all my years that I really loved were those first couple of years in the Missoulian when I was a reporter. And I think the two jobs have a lot together. They both give you that chance to get out and do stuff and explore and ask questions and learn new things. They're great jobs. What do you plan to do with your writing? I work at home. I work where it's quiet and I need it, but I have two kids, but the younger one got out of high school, out of Helgate a couple of years ago. So I have the house pretty much to myself all day. I don't work well when I'm distracted. But I work at home. I kind of migrate around the house. As I said, I'll often do an hour or two in the morning before I even get up. And this is not laziness. What this is that it's my very best time to do something that's really original. And it's also the time, a whole lot of writing fiction involves, or at least for me, is just the process of becoming in my mind for a while another person. And by getting to work right first thing in the morning, it's much easier and faster for me to slip into the character of Mandy or to become Asia talking, for instance, than it is if I wait until 10 in the morning and by that time, I've got a phone call wanting to know, from the road oiler wanting to know if I want the dust kept down this year, and, somebody else has called and I've had a telemarketer on the phone and all this kind of thing. So that's just sort of my time. And those morning hours I really guard. I not only turn the answering machine on, but I turn the volume off. I turn the ringers off. And, nobody but my border collie gets through to me. And she's border collie. I mean, she's a herding dog with nobody to herd but me. And Millie's got real strong feelings about my routine. She hops up on the bed with me and knows I do those first couple of hours that way. By 8:30, 9 o'clock, she grabs my wrist and it's time for breakfast. And then I move into a study, and I've got a upright computer too, and I'll work in there, and Millie sort of leads me forward. And by mid-afternoon, she's ready for me to be done, and I'm pretty much ready to be done too with my writing. I find it real hard to sit in one spot. A couple of things, and it's taken me a while, but I think two things save me from that, and I've got days that nothing gets done. But the two things, the one technique that I've learned is that I always start with the day before, whatever I've written for the last couple of days, and I just kind of go through and nitpick the wording on my computer. And I mean, that's a real no-brainer. But at the same time, it slips me into that writing mode and kind of catches me up, and it's easy to go from there. And once you get caught up, the time flies. I literally am surprised sometimes when 2 or 3 hours have gone by. You just lose that time. The other thing, again, is that journaling that I'm talking about. And it's not a journal, but it's free writing. But if you do it every morning for 10 or 15 minutes, you print your stuff out every Friday, you don't edit as you go, but you just type as fast as you can, pages mount up. And even after only doing that for a few years, I've got half a file drawer full of bound pages, a lot of which have something that may work into a story someplace. So I don't ever really have to face a blank page. I always know that if no other idea comes to me, I can go out and read my own unused stuff. Some of you have probably read Bruce Coville's stuff, or you did when you were younger. He did all the Alien books, and Jennifer, The Day Ate My Teacher, and the Magic Shop books, and Jennifer is my favorite. He is, and Bruce was my first writing teacher, really. And one of his pieces of advice was never ever throw anything away. Even if it doesn't belong in the book that you wrote it for, it may show up. You may have a use for it later. We do so many things, and that question of whether they're valid if we don't do something professional with them never even comes up. If you are a gardener, nobody ever considers you a non-gardener if you don't sell your stuff at the farmer's market. And nobody ever questions if you're a quilter why you bother with it if you're not selling your quilts. But that question comes up with writers all the time, and you almost get that feeling that a person's thinking, well, if I'm going to write, it's a dumb way to use my time unless I'm going to try and sell it. And it's really not. It's a way of tracking your life. It's a way of sorting out what's happening in your life. For me, and I think for most writers, it's the way we find out, who we are and what we're thinking about. When I've got problems that just are really a muddle, I work them out on paper. That's my way. And I think that's a way of a lot of people, whether they ever want to publish it or not. And a lot of people don't, because you take a lot of risk when you try to publish something. And you also expose yourself, often in ways